idea of what to cover. So I'll cover calling, then I'll do the Microsoft and video devices and Interop. The video devices and joining Microsoft Zoom, that's kind of, I'm going to treat it as, hey, here's how you join. Here's how you can be, let's say, meeting agnostic. So you can, with our video devices or whatnot, you can join a Microsoft meeting or a Zoom meeting or any third-party meeting and try to keep it as easy and vanilla as possible. And then we'll close out the night with talking about the new Webex or the new endpoint that we have that we just announced this week. So with that, I will go ahead and bring that over here. And we will talk about Webex Calling. So with this, here, we're a small enough group that if you have questions, just come off mute and shout them out. And we can go from there. If you have questions, pertaining, hey, I have communications manager, or I want to do, how do I do a hybrid, or give me a scenario, or if you want to look at that, we can have that discussion as well. So basically everything is, on the table. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up another slide here to start to kind of explain things. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I'll let me start with a couple slides because this is going to talk about architecture and what our choices are first. So Webex Calling, it's all about, how do we move our calling workload to the cloud? And with that, try to make it as, seamless for the users. How can we make the user experience smooth? How do we maintain dial plan for those users? And how do we transition if you have communications manager on-prem? What are our choices to go to the cloud? How do we integrate during that migration period, and what does it look like at the end? So the big thing is, you'll hear, at least when I talk, that top layer is the orchestration and management control point, which is our Webex Control Hub. So if you have typically any calling subscription from Cisco, whether it's Communications Manager, Webex Meetings, if you have a Flex subscription or anything like that, you should have a Webex Control Hub instance that you have access to. And we'll talk a little bit about what you can do within that. Then, then underneath Webex Control Hub, it can manage and give you integrations into the different workloads, whether it's a messaging workload, a meetings workload, contact center with our Webex Contact Center, or Webex Calling. And you'll see in this diagram, there's Webex Calling, there's two boxes. There's multi-tenant, and then there's dedicated. And the difference between those is multi-tenant is, think of it as a, internet scale, Webex Calling instance. So you have a whole bunch of microservices running in that Webex Calling. There's really no limit on how many users we can put on that. It's just all about, hey, when we need to, we add scale into our data centers. We'll talk about data centers here in a little bit. Those data centers are, across the world. and we have redundancy across data centers with that multi-tenant. It's all basically, orchestrated from a DevOps perspective, so it's always running 24/7. Yeah, there might be some maintenance windows to say, hey, this microservice is being rebooted or upgraded periodically, but it's basically meant to be cloud infrastructure, cloud scale. It's in the cloud. We manage the whole back end. All what you have to do is manage your users, manage your features. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Then we have our dedicated instance. I think this is probably the worst name known to man on it, but hey, I'm not in marketing. But dedicated instance is where we put the core set, or it's based on Communications Manager code, and we will stand up a instance of Communications Manager integrated into your control hub, and it's dedicated for you. And you basically tell us, hey, how many users do you have? Where are those users located? And we'll stand up the dedicated instance for you. The dedicated instance will, since it's call manager, you can take all your existing all your phones, your 7940s, 7965s, 78, 88, 68, 6900 phones. All those phones will work. So if it works today in Communications Manager, it's going to work there. And it has all the features of Communications Manager. So it has all the integration points. So if you have paging systems, nurse call systems, healthcare, PMS systems for hospitality, all that stuff can be integrated into the dedicated instance. We're responsible for maintaining the hardware that's running on dedicated instance. We're also responsible for maintaining the software. So right now, if you go a dedicated instance, it's going to be 12.5 software, and probably in the fairly near future, we're going to offer 14 as well. The nice thing about it is if you have a subscription for Webex Calling, we will give you both multi-tenant, or by default, we give you multi-tenant. And then if you want dedicated instance, it's a checkbox. And then we spin up that dedicated instance for you if you check that box. Your user management for your users is going to be within Control Hub. And you add licenses saying, hey, this user is on multi-tenant, this user is on call manager, and you're off and running. The other aspect to that is, let's see, where was I going with this? We do give you access to the native call manager interfaces. So if anyone's familiar with our HCS product, that was typically hidden behind a couple different user interfaces or partner interfaces. In this case, in dedicated instance, we give you basically a link to launch into the CCM admin pages and whatnot. So any questions about that concept?
Yeah, what besides the web interface, what kind of access is there? Is there like an API for doing calls into the database, things like that?
Yeah, so all the normal, communications manager APIs like the, TAPI, JTAPI, REST APIs, the XML APIs, they all exist. They still exist in dedicated instance. Excuse me, was there another question out there as well?
No, not for me.
Okay, so from a PSTN perspective, this is where I'll have a couple slides here from a architecture perspective, but the PSTN can be delivered that's via the cloud. So we have a plethora of vendors that connect directly to our cloud. and that is covered under Cloud Connected Pstn. That could be like the NTTs, the Verizons, the AT&Ts of the world, IntelliPeer, Veracity, and a bunch of others. Then we also, Cisco has our own Pstn offering that you connect, you basically purchase that from us. And our Pstn offering is right now, it is US, Canada, the UK. I think there's a bunch of, we just added a whole bunch of sites in the Caribbean, and Germany, and I think France, and maybe Amsterdam. So our cloud Pstn footprint is a little smaller, but if you're a US based company, then that could be a really good option. And the nice integration there is all the Pstn services are integrated directly into Control Hub. So when you can order, provision, add new phone numbers, port phone numbers directly from Control Hub, where in the cloud connected Pstn, you might have to reach out to that vendor to add numbers and port numbers and do that. And last but not least, there's always the local gateway Pstn, where from this cloud, you basically take a SIP trunk down to a Q router, and then that's plugged into whatever SIP trunk's PRI or into Call Manager from there. And as we go on, from a dedicated instance, when you purchase this, it comes with the multi-tenant by default, and it's never, you just don't buy dedicated instance by itself. You get both worlds, and there could be some reasons why you want some people on multi-tenant and some people on dedicated instance. With that one, I was working with one customer, and they were in healthcare, and they put their billing departments and their back office departments on multi-tenant because it was easier to use, easier to scale. Those people were working from home already, so the multi-tenant was just basically over-the-top internet. They just had to deploy the Webex app soft phone to them, and they were off and running. And then they used basically a hybrid connection back into their call manager for all their clinical stations were still on communications manager. And the nice thing about that is, hey, you can choose, I have these knowledge workers or these phones, they can go up to multi-tenant, or these other phones, maybe older versions, maybe high density analog or others, or sites that need the survivability of dedicated, i.e. SRST or more publisher subscribers and more subscribers, then they can go to dedicated instance. Then from there, here's kind of what is Webex Calling. Here's our different data centers that we have for Webex Calling. I think there's, this might be a little out of date because I think there is a Singapore data center for Webex Calling as well. But it's basically 85 markets that we have access to. Our SLA is basically 4 nines, so 99.99 for the SLA. And probably the biggest drop in the SLA is mainly your access to our network. And here's the updated map that has Singapore on it. But this shows you kind of where our, unified Webex data centers, which has all the services. Then we have our calling data centers in the dark blue. Then we have media pops in a light blue. Then control of instances for AWS, common identity servers, and Mpp EDOS. EDOS is our enterprise discovery service, where phones will home into to get new firmware or to get which cluster are they being attached to. From a feature visibility for Webex calling, I think, being a longtime collab guy, I would say I was kind of worried that Webex calling wasn't going to be as feature rich because we had all the nerd knobs and call manager to do whatever we want with. That was one of the strengths, and over the last, almost 20 years that we've been working with call manager, that we've had the features. And I would say there's not a lot that I can't do on call manager that I can do in Webex calling. It has most of the user facing features and some of the other features. There's a couple corner cases that aren't quite there yet in my mind. That has like the nerd knobs of enterprise parameters of call manager, but I'm pretty satisfied that we have a really good set of features listed here. From a device perspective, there's kind of, several different categories of devices. One is the basic side, where I have a 68, 7800 series phones. I have ATA 191, 192 for analog ports. We just came out with our VG400 support for high density analog. If you're looking for like 124 ports of analog, you go into the VG400. We had the audio code gateways that we supported prior to the VG400. And I think one of those is like 17 ports and another one's 24 ports or, something like that. I need to verify that one. We do support the conference room phones for the 7832, 8832, and the Webex room phone. From a advanced phone series, we have our 8800 series phones. We also have our Mpp Dect phones. Those are mainly from the SpectraLink Dect phone series. We just, in the last few months, went GA with a new Cisco wireless phone, which is the 840, 860 phones. Those are based on Android, and they are a Wi-Fi phone. And it's, kind of analogous to think of a smartphone, an Android, iPhone type thing, but Wi-Fi. And it's registered natively to the Webex calling via the MPP. So those phones they come with either a scanner or a non-scanner version, and they're becoming very popular in warehouses and in healthcare right now. We do have the 8845 and 8865 video phone series, and then we have all the accessories that you would come to expect with our key expansion modules for the listed phones. And then last but not least is we have our whole headset line, whether it be wired, USB, DECT wireless, or something like this, which is, Bluetooth, that I just basically pair to my Desk Pro or to my laptop for Bluetooth. We came out with just in the last couple weeks, the announcement that we made earlier this year with Bang & Olufsen. So we have a new high-end headset that is over the ear instead of on the ear. And the Bang & Olufsen over the ear, so it's a lot more comfortable if you're on phone calls all day long. And the battery life is commensurate for being on calls all day long. If you have enterprise phones and you have existing phones, to get them up to register to the Webex Cloud, we basically convert the phones from Communications Manager UCM firmware over to the MPP firmware. There's no license required if you are converting those phones to use with Webex calling. There's two ways, or there's several ways to do it. One is just go to upgrade.cisco.com and do a manual process phone by phone to upgrade those. Or you can leverage Communications Manager and set that phone to a different firmware, basically a interim load that will convert that phone from Communications Manager up to Mpp. Then you go on Control Hub, add the phone in Control Hub, and you can either use the MAC address to add the phone and have it register, or you can generate an activation code. Then the user hits the 16-digit activation code on the phone to join and register up to the cloud. Any questions there?
Not for me. It looks pretty straightforward.
The one nice thing from a feature perspective that just came out is, I think everyone's seen the noise removal on our meetings clients, so that if you have a dog barking or you have a wrapper, or someone eating a bag of chips, we have noise removal that came out from our Babel Labs acquisition, went into meetings, went into the clients. Now we've put it onto our phones. So then you can just go toggle into the phone and audio preferences and set the noise removal to be on. So now you can use a hard phone and dogs barking and whatnot, or you have colleagues that are in a loud office environment or warehouse, then they can take advantage of that noise removal. Right now, it's only on our Mpp phones. For Communications Manager phones, it's going to be available here in about another month or so. And it's going to be it'll be in a firmware attached to version 14. It will work with Call Manager 12.5, but it will be a version 14 firmware release. And then with the whole pandemic, a lot of people are bypassing phones, from being at home. So there's always the Webex app to be your soft phone. The nice thing about the Webex app is it's been designed and worked where based when you log into the Webex app, it's going to go up to Control Hub and it's going to see that, okay, Dennis Trope I'm a Webex calling user. So it's going to activate the Webex calling soft phone. And I'm going to have all the features of the Webex calling soft phone. With that, my directory numbers, how I configure that and how I utilize that will leverage the Webex calling up in the cloud. If in the Control Hub, it says that, okay, I have a user selection that says Dennis Trope is on Call Manager, then it's going to load the Jabber soft phone within the Webex app. So now the soft phone will be Jabber and it will pull all the features. It'll register to Call Manager. If you're on-prem, it's going to register directly to Call Manager. If you're at your home, then you're going to use mobile remote access to have that Jabber soft phone register back through your Expressway servers back to Call Manager. And then you pull all your features it's basically then you're using Jabber as your features in your soft phone. And typically if I pull this up in front of people, they won't know whether it's Jabber or Webex calling. Probably all of us would we would look and say, okay, here's kind of a little different nomenclature, or here's kind of how different settings works in the client. So I know that I'm on Jabber versus Webex calling. But our whole idea is to make it seamless to the user, whether they're on Jabber or Webex calling. So Heal?
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question. I thought the Jabber client is end of life. Is Cisco still, or in the end of sales? Is it Cisco still promoting it, or?
Right now there are no plans to end of life Jabber. Jabber has a, you could probably say that the development is pretty feature rich or feature complete to some degree. But there's a lot of cases and there's a lot of customers that cannot move away from Jabber. Whether it be healthcare, whether it's air gapped, whether it's DoD or civilian, federal, in those cases, that we cannot end of life Jabber. And right now, I have not heard of any plans whatsoever to end of life Jabber.
Okay, thank you.
One great question. One thing is, it might not get new features like the Webex app will, but Jabber is still there. And if you look at Jabber in the, I think it was the 12.7, 12.8 release, they had the modern view of Jabber, so you can turn on Jabber and it looks just like the Webex app. So there's a lot of things that our product managers are doing just to make the look and feel to be fairly straightforward. The features, phone control, so I can use it as a soft phone, or I can select, whether it's Webex Calling or whether it's Call Manager, I can set it to be in hard phone control. If I set my Webex app, I can control one of the phones behind me, or I can control my Desk Pro that I'm talking on now. From a meetings perspective, I can record meetings and all that. From an audio perspective, for just straight calls, we use Dubber and Webex Calling to start, stop, pause, resume recordings from there. I do have by hitting the 3 dots, I can also escalate a call up to a meeting. So with that, let's kind of go through a little bit of architecture. So we have this Webex Calling Cloud. You have your customer premise in the blue. You might have a remote home office that has Webex Calling endpoints. We do have a global discovery service, and that is being used for self-provisioning for activation codes. If you had a phone user via the MAC address, then it goes to the EDOS service part of GDS to basically say, okay, this MAC address has been added to, Acme.com's Control Hub instance. So it'll go up there and say, okay, does Acme have this MAC address? Yes, it does. Okay, have that phone registered to Acme.com. Between the customer premise and our cloud, there is an access network. This is typically by default just straight over the top internet. It can also be, we can also leverage Webex Edge to provide that internet service. Webex Edge, for a short explanation, what it is it's a peering point between your customer premise and to an Equinix data center. Then it's peered from an Equinix data center up into the Webex cloud. And we do that peering. You basically say, hey, here's my link to Equinix. And then we just set up BGP routes from Equinix up all the way up to our Webex data center. There's some other magic there to separate access and to guarantee bandwidth. And you buy how much bandwidth you need, whether it's 10 meg, 100 meg, a gig, 2 gig, how many redundancy links do you have, all that kind of stuff is all part of that design. We are working on designs for, there's from a Webex meeting perspective, we have designs for SD-WAN and VPN. Calling is going to get those designs eventually, but right now, the Webex Edge is via Equinix. Then what we do is basically the endpoints will connect up to the cloud. From a firewall perspective, We're only requiring outbound firewall ports only for that. There is a network requirements doc for the whole plethora of services that you have to enable. My recommendation is go after that doc. If you need access, if you want a link to that doc, ping me one-on-one, either Teams or email, and we can I can get you that doc. But then once you have that connection up to the internet, it registers to Webex Calling and you're off and running. From a PSTN perspective, you can bring your own PSTN. So if you have an existing PSTN, then we just put it into a local gateway and register that trunk up there. Or you can do a Cisco provided PSTN or one of our cloud connected providers that will peer to us that you can use them. And then certain service providers can bundle their Pstn offering with their branded Webex Calling BroadSoft offering as well. Yes, O'Heal.
Sorry, it's a quick. So we have like a couple of clients who were talking about them about this Webex Calling, and some of them are like pretty. They are still dependent on their POTS line, and they like their POTS line still. And I heard like there is a service that you can port the POTS line to the cloud. Have you heard of that, or is that the solution?
Are they, help me understand, are they dependent on their POTS line or are they dependent on their carrier? Or do they want it?
I think they want that, they just wanted to have that POTS line available on the on their new environment. That's what they told us. And we were talking to our vendor about that, and they said that Cisco can port that number to their cloud. So I don't know if you've heard of that.
Probably in 98% of the cases, we can port the number from that carrier up into either a Cisco provided PSTN cloud or cloud connected PSTN from another carrier, that you can port those numbers. And now that number, let's say my phone number is 801-453-6719. It's Verizon today, but I want to move that up into the cloud. I can port that phone number up to Cisco provided PSTN. We have a whole team that does that. All what they're doing, they're just responsible for managing the ports of those phone numbers.
Okay.
So you put in a request in Control Hub that I want to port this phone number.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we will work with you and the carriers to port that number and say, okay, on this date, that port's going to go live on May 30th or whatever the date turns out to be.
Perfect. Thank you.
So absolutely, we can port the phone numbers. The nice thing, the other thing we can do is if some customers will have let's say a long-term contract with, let's say Lumen or AT&T or whoever, and they want to keep those phone numbers or keep those circuits, then you can do that BYOP, bring your own PSTN, and take those trunks and just create a trunk up to the cloud. And then all the voice services will ingress and egress out of that cube router. And then you just have route groups and trunk groups in the Webex calling cloud to say, okay, when you dial 9, what happens when you dial, international calling? It's going to route down to the cube, then out those SIP trunks or circuits on that cube router.
Mm-hmm.
Fairly straightforward. We have a lot of guides that just basically almost can cut and paste what that cube router looks like. That cube router can be on ISR G2s, 4400 routers. It can even run vCube as a virtual machine as a 1000V or an 8000V router. So you have a lot of different options there. Webex Calling has a concept of locations. So let's say in this location, I can have local gateway. So let's say their LA headquarters is local gateway, but then they might have a San Diego office that could be cloud connected Pstn. And you can mix and match those, however you want. And you can have even, one location is local gateway, one location Cisco provided Pstn, another location is, Veracity or, NTT provided Pstn, and they all coexist.
Thank you.
And here's kind of where you basically have a local gateway, and it takes a trunk, through your firewall up to the Webex Calling cloud, and you're off and running. And then, from a calling perspective, if you're doing Webex calling from on-prem to the remote office, then we do media optimization, and we can send that media directly from the Webex calling endpoint to endpoint. It does not have to go all the way up to the cloud and all the way back down. Same thing from a media stun optimization from the Webex calling endpoints, calling it to the local gateway or to the local communications manager endpoints. I can route that call from the Webex calling endpoints to the local gateway to call manager endpoints, and I can optimize that traffic.
So just to make sure, basically the local gateway, like if the customer wants to, if they have already SIP and they want to push everything to cloud, the call path go through that kind of northbound of that firewall. But if they bring their own like SIP trunk or POTS line or PRI, it goes through that local gateway. Is that correct?
That's correct. So if they're bringing their own SIP trunks, you just take those SIP trunks, plug them into the cube router here that's running local gateway, and then we have a trunk up to our cloud to route that traffic to the cloud.
Okay.
From a call recording perspective, all the phones that are Webex calling endpoints, we include Dubber call recording for free with that. So any user can record calls for free with that. The only thing on the free side is we just retain those recordings for 30 days. If you want to retain those callings for longer than 30 days, or if you want administrative access to those recordings, then there is a slight upcharge. From a 911 perspective, we have two things for 911. Oops. One is we have 911 notifications. So whenever someone dials 911, part of Control Hub, there will be a configuration to say, if this location dials 911, send an email to whoever's you've specified for the 911. Red Sky, what they do is you will create a map of your network and of your 911 addresses in the Red Sky portal, and you basically assign endpoints to that portal. They can be dynamic as well. And so when someone calls 911 from my home office, Red Sky will say, hey, Dennis's home office is at 123 Main Street. So dispatch, the first emergency responders to Dennis's home address. And if Dennis is using a soft phone, so if he's using Webex Calling, then in the Webex Calling interface, I have a place where I can enter in my address. And then it verifies that address and validates it. And then now, as long as it shows that I picked up that same IP address or the same gateway and MAC address, if I'm on the same BSSID for wireless, it'll recognize that I'm at home, and it'll automatically assign me to that location to me. If I go to, let's say, a Starbucks, and I work from Starbucks, I'll be on the Starbucks wireless network, and then I enter in the Starbucks address. When I launch my app, it'll say, hey, you've changed locations. What's your address? And you can say, well, I'm using my mobile hotspot, or I'm using Starbucks Wi-Fi. And then you enter in the address of the Starbucks. And then every time you go back to the Starbucks, it remembers that address, and that it associates that address with the BSSID of Starbucks. So I don't have to enter it every time I go to Starbucks to work. Some cool features there. Any questions from there?
Would this be an appropriate product or entry point in for contact center, or is that a separate discussion?
So the Webex Contact Center, do I have any? No, it doesn't look like I have any slides here on the contact center. But Webex Contact Center kind of overlays, it's an adjacent cloud or to the Webex Calling cloud. And the contact center can be overlaid on top of this, or the Webex Contact Center cloud can be overlaid on top of Communications Manager Pstn or any other third-party Pstn. I've put it on Avaya, I've put it on RingCentral, I even put it on Microsoft. So it's just the Webex Contact Center is looking at, from an agent perspective, it doesn't care where that agent is, as long as it has a routable phone number to route that call to. The ingress trunks for contact center can be the local gateway down here in green and route it up to Webex Calling, and then hit Webex Contact Center and then route that call to that remote office on the bottom right there. So it can work, the clouds are connected and they're paired together, so you can bring in calls from cloud connected PSTN or bring your own PSTN, route it up to the contact center, then deliver it down to a endpoint on Webex Calling, or deliver it on an endpoint on CUCM down on the bottom in the blue box. Or it could be any phone number running on RingCentral, or it could be a cell phone, it could be a home phone. Doesn't really matter. It's just a phone number to us. Does that answer your question enough?
Yeah.
Sweet. So probably the last thing I will do, and give me a quick sec, is I am going to log into my Control Hub and show you what the user interfaces, or what the admin interfaces look like. So bear with me for a quick sec. So basically this is, hopefully everyone, I'll assume no one's seen Control Hub. So I apologize if people have seen this and it's kind of redundant, but this is our Control Hub interface. This is our main overview page. It shows you kind of like an overview of, hey, based on what's the health of your Control Hub from a best practices perspective, i.e., if you set up SSO, if you set up directory synchronization, if you claimed your users, domains, and that kind of stuff. And then it shows, hey, what are your WebEx services? Are they all green on our side? We have devices. How many devices are online? How many are offline? And how many users have been added to the system? From down this left-hand side, I have 3 sections. I have a monitoring section where I can look at analytics, troubleshooting, and reports. The next section is where I manage my users, my workspaces, and my devices. Devices can be video devices or phones. And then last but not least, this is where I manage my different workloads of messaging, meeting, and calling, and hybrid connections and connected UC. To manage my users, I just click on users, and you can see that I have a list of my users. These users, all my users have been added via Azure Active Directory. I have basically a SCIM connector or enterprise application in Azure that basically says when I add, let's say, Alex Trope into that enterprise application as a user, then Alex will be synced across into Control Hub, and now I can add licenses to Alex or to those users. That license assignment, I can set it up where it's organizational based. So anytime I add a new user, they get all these licenses here on the right. Or I can create group-based management either via the AD connector or the directory connector or the new Azure connector that we just released, that I can say, hey, I'm going to create a group in Azure AD, and that group will be managed over here. I can have a group, let's say finances or IT admin or billing or accounts receivable or accounting, and I can create different user group or different license groups based on groups. For contacts, so not just users, but let's say I have, like in Call Manager, I have, if I'm in healthcare, I have radiology department, emergency room, results or billing or labs, or, think of all the different contacts that I have in Communications Manager. I can bulk upload and manage those contacts from here, and it looks to the users as just another dialable number or dialable user. From workspaces, here's where I have 3 workspaces here. I have a RoomKit Plus. I have a Desk Hub that's kind of right here. If you haven't seen the Desk Hub, check it out. It's pretty amazing. You just plug in the Desk Hub. It is your phone. It's your video conference device. You just add a camera, add a headset, plug it into your monitor, plug it into your laptop, and you're off and running. From a hot desking perspective, I just take my phone and I put it into the cradle. It charges my phone, and then it knows through NFC that it's Dennis Trope. And now that device signs in as Dennis Trope. So it's a really cool device. And then I have a RoomKit Mini behind me that is at my home. From the other devices, I have those devices. I have my phones. If I want to add a device, I just take here and say, okay, this is going to be an existing user. Hit next. Say, hey, this is Alex. Well, if I learn how to type my son's name, add him to it. Hit next. And then it says, hey, here's the activation code that Alex types into his phone. Types it in, and now it immediately registers to the cloud into Webex Calling, and I'm done. And I have settings up here for setting the devices, how I manage the software. Do I want to be on a beta channel or a stable channel, or I want to delay software updates? I can manage those software updates from up here. To manage features for calling, I come in here and say calling, and I go, here's all the numbers that I have part of my location. If I want to add numbers, I just come up here and add, or I can move those numbers, delete those numbers, or export all from here. If I click add, Then it goes into, okay, what site do I want to add the numbers to? Do I want to order new numbers or do I want to port? And I go new numbers, and let me just this thing. I hit next. Then it comes up and say, okay, do I want regular phone numbers? Yeah, it's in the California region. What area code do I want? I'll do the 442. How many numbers do I want? I'll do 5 or 25. Oop. I'll do 10. I do a search. And now I can select, what numbers do I want, and then hit order, and then it orders those phone numbers, and about 3 minutes later, it'll be in my control hub to use. Try doing that with Call Manager or others. So that's pretty awesome. So I'll just back out of this because I don't need new numbers. I'll just hit the X up here. So that's kind of the numbers, locations. I have just site one if I want to add a location. Let's say I'm going to add a location in San Diego. What's the language I'm going to want to choose? What's the country that I want to specify? This will be the United States of America. I give it an address, a time zone, city, town, zip code, and this uses this for 911 locations. And then I add it and I'm done. For call routing, so this is where remember when I mentioned a SIP trunk from local gateway up to the cloud? To route from the cloud back down to that local gateway, I basically add a trunk, create a route group, create a dial plan to route calls down to that, across that trunk, verify the call routing, and I'm done. So a lot easier to add the trunks than Call Manager. From a features perspective, here is auto attendant, call park extension, call park group, call pickup. If anyone wants to see anything, shout out and I'll dive into it. If not, we can look at that sometime later, but here's an auto attendant, general settings. Here's the phone number, call forwarding disabled, dialing options. I create a schedule. The schedule is basically a work day. Here's where I create the menu. So I can enable extension dialing without requiring a menu option. Press 1 for dial by name, press 2 to transfer to this phone number, press 3 to dial by extension, and to your heart's content for your normal auto attendant. I think this is a lot easier than doing an auto attendant in Unity. So just, hopefully you're getting the gist that this control hub is a pretty powerful tool to, notice how I haven't left the web page. I haven't cross-launched anything. I haven't popped up a new window or anything. It's all within the same web page. So I think I know we're about an hour into it. I think that's probably the, kind of the gist of a quick overview of architecture and the interfaces for Webex calling. Any comments, thoughts, anything you want me to cover?
Dennis, quick question about the paging. For paging, do we have to, on the switch level, do we still have to set up all of that PIM, DENS, and sparse, and rendezvous point, and everything else downstream to enable the paging?
So, excuse me. So paging is typically paging to phones and to devices, like an Informacast device.
Okay.
So I will set up a page for you for site one. I will say this is a dentist page. The paging phone number, I'll give it a free phone number in my list, which is 008, or I can say, hey, none, and I'll say this is going to be 1008 as an extension. The language for the group, it will be English. Calling display is, let's say Dennis Page. Calling ID label is a paging group ID. I hit next. And then I'm basically saying, what are my targets? So I can either say, here's the devices on here. So in this case, I'll do 1002, then I'll do 1004, and my desk hub. The desk hub won't ring because I don't have it powered up. Then hit next. The originating orders, I'll give it the 1004. And now whenever I dial 1008, it will page those targets and we're off and running. So now I have that paging group. I come over here, and if I did it right, this is a test of the paging system. Thank you very much. And it went offline there when I paged, and we're off and running. So that's kind of paging for the groups. I can also add, if I add analog extensions, I can page to an overhead paging system from Interop here.
Thank you. And one other question about the registration of the phone. So the phone is like, it has to be that Mpp firmware, and they can just, they unbox it and connect it to any internet, and it's asking for the code. Is it how, I've never deployed it in the real life. How does it look like to deploy a phone on the client?
So to deploy a phone, if the phone is ordered as an MPP software phone, when you plug it in, it's going to go through and go out to the internet. It's going to, if you plug it into PoE, it's going to boot up, going to go out to the network, check to see, hey, what's the latest firmware version, and then it'll download a new firmware version if it's not at the level of firmware that's needed. And then it will go into, then it'll check to see if a MAC address has been entered into that EDOS service. If a MAC address has been entered, then it will go ahead and automatically be provisioned to that company's service and that user that you added it to. If it cannot find its MAC address in our EDOS server, then it'll come up to a window saying, please enter your activation code.
I see. Thank you.
If I come back here to devices, and let's say I add another device, then I can also use a bulk uploads to do multiple devices, or I can do one by one. And if I go into this existing user and I'll go, let's go add a phone for Josh. IP phone. I select the device type. This is an 8861. And this is where I basically specify by activation code or by MAC address. If it's by MAC address, I enter the MAC address there and then save it, and I'm done. Then as soon as that MAC address plugs into the network, reaches out to the internet, then you're off and running.
Thank you.
Will non-Cisco endpoints work with this?
Well, do you want the official answer or no? So the official answer is yes. There's not anything here. So it's probably not a mine, but I will bring those up. There is a handful of endpoints that we support Um, and let me, here is a help article for the devices supported for Webex calling. It's obviously the 6800, 78, 8800 series. There's these Dect phones, these conference phones, ATAs, phone accessories, video endpoints. Then down here, there is for supported third-party devices. So for these Yealing phones and these Polycom phones, these Yealing conference devices, and then here is like customer managed devices like IP speakers, IP door phones, single wire fusion for paging, and Grand Stream devices. So yes, just know that there is a little bit, you have to do manual deployment through the Yealink and Poly, and you don't have, there's a couple limited advanced features on some of the phones.
Okay, but at least there is something out there. Because I could see migration being a bit of a challenge for somebody that's not already a Cisco or wanting to go, 100% Cisco.
Yeah, so we don't cover all the Polycoms or all the Yealinks, but I think the newest models we have support for, or the latest models. And then I would just say, two things with that is work with your account team. We'd probably be offering some killer discounts to swap out the phones. And then a lot of companies they're sticking with that soft phone strategy, which will be interesting in a couple of years when they go, okay, we decided to do soft phones for a lot of users, but now the headsets are breaking and they're finding that they're having to replace headsets more often and having that cost burden.
How's the scalability for large deployments?
The nice thing about that is scalability. It's really, there's no limit on the number of users and phones that an organization can have. We have a couple organizations that are going into the 30 and 40 and 1,000 devices. The issue that you will run into, and like one of them is Ford. They're a big user of this, and I know there's some let's see, I was just talking to a guy today, Metlife Insurance. They're going big time, so they have tens of thousands, and it's not so much the scalability of how many endpoints that we can do. It's one of the things that we're working on now is how well do you manage those endpoints? i.e., can I manage them by location? Can I list them by location? Because you can see, like, I can come here and I can do filtering based on product status, belongs to, issues, upgrade channels, but it's the tags that are important, where if you tag the device to say that device is in the Salt Lake location or Denver location or LA, that's really critical so that you can bring up a list of all the phones in LA or all the phones in Denver. That's probably the bigger, or the more, it's maybe a little more cumbersome at times to manage it that way. And I think we're constantly adding features and capabilities to basically manage it. That's where we came out with, creating templates for configuration by location and devices. And same thing with managing software for the devices to say, hey, when can they upgrade? What version are they on? Do we want to have IT run the preview release so that they get, access to the firmware before their general population, so they can test it, and then they graduate those. They can graduate, up to a stable software version before. So hopefully that answered that one. Anything else?
Nope, not here.
So Vitaly, we kind of talked a little bit on the Slido for, hey, you want to talk a little bit about Microsoft Interop. What I will do here is
go ahead.
I'll take about 10 minutes on Microsoft Interop, and then we can call it a night. And
That would be perfect, because we will need to finish around 8:30. It's usually 1.5 hours, but it's not strict. But if you can, because I wanted to ask you to talk about Microsoft Interop a little.
Sweet.
So please go ahead.
So, if you want, I'll talk about Microsoft Interop, and then if need be, if we have time, I can maybe show you a little bit what I'm talking about. So we're doing basically 3 different ways of doing here's 3 areas that we're investing in. One is, number 1, Webex meetings integration. So being able to integrate Webex meetings into an MS Teams interface and have a good feature rich, so that if you're in MS Teams, you want to launch a Webex meeting, it's basically a click to, it's a bot, it's a button, it's a chat message to create a Webex meeting within a channel or within a one-to-one message, or schedule a meeting and schedule a meeting within Microsoft and add a Webex meeting into it. And that's a fairly mature integration. We have a fair number of roadmap features on there, for interface, for workflows and user scenarios. The one thing that I will mention on there, and actually both on meetings integration and calling integration, is a lot of users can get confused when you're talking MS Teams to Cisco and going, okay, do I want to use MS Teams for meetings or Webex for meetings? And my recommendation is to pick one and ride the horse. And there's a lot of reasons why I would pick Webex. Mainly, they pay my paycheck. But the other thing is mainly for internal versus external. I've found a lot of customers are saying, hey, I'm going to use Microsoft because my executive said, hey, I need to use Microsoft. We're paying an E3. We get messaging. We get this point-to-point calling. We should use it, and it's included and whatnot. Or they're doing the same thing with E5. Microsoft does a decent job on internal meetings, but then when you want to escalate it and bring in people externally, it's not as seamless and not as robust as Microsoft or as Webex is. So that a lot of customers say, we'll do Microsoft for internal, but we're going to still leverage Webex because it's a lot more robust, feature rich, and scalable worldwide for Webex, where Microsoft might be lacking there. So they'll split that. And what happens is users just get a little confused. And then when you add a calling integration to that, and if you don't do it right, it gets a little bit more confusing. So if you add the Webex calling integration to Microsoft Teams, make sure that you go into Microsoft, run the PowerShell command, or go into their profile and their settings and remove the Microsoft calling icon, so that the only icon they have to make calls are from Webex Calling. And then the last thing is we're taking our headsets and our cameras to get them certified for Microsoft Teams, so that you can use Windows Hello for logging in, for example. Actually, let me go full screen here. So some of the things that we're looking at doing certifications is our desk camera. We have a 4K version that's been out, and it's an awesome camera. If you haven't tried it, go get one. It's going to be around $100 for a 4K USB camera, high quality. It has, you know, the kind of best overview. So if you rise up, it's going to rise up with you. You go down, it's going to load, you know, basically pan and tilt, pan you around and tilt up and down to frame you correctly. And then we're certifying our 300 series headsets and our 700 series headsets as well. Here's kind of what the meetings tab looks for Microsoft Teams. Is that when you are in a channel, actually I wish when I move my mouse it doesn't change. So you'll have a Webex up here on here. So when you click Webex in a channel, you're logged in as Karen Adams. I can start a meeting. I can schedule a meeting over here on the right. I can meet live. I just hit the meet button over here and it'll launch a Webex meeting and invite all your users. Or I can just say, hey, there is a meeting ID. I'm going to join, you know, Dennis's meeting, and I know his personal room ID is DTROP. I'm going to join his meeting, and it's all done via Teams. I could schedule a meeting, the topic, the password, date and time, additional attendees, and schedule it and see up and running. I can click up and running, upcoming meetings for those meetings for there. If I, for MS Teams with Webex meetings, you know, they don't need to install the bot anymore for one-on-ones. They can just basically mention, you know, Webex, and now I can schedule that meeting. And when it comes time to join, I just get a join button to join the meeting. We talked about the scheduling function already, and we're off and running there. Now for calling, here's basically the calling tab for MS Teams. So I'll have a Webex call icon on the left. When I click on that, it'll give me this calling tab where I can make a call via I click those, you know, the 10 dots, and that'll basically bring up a dial pad, and I can, you know, just hit 9-801-910-7200 to call me. Or I have a search bar where I can enter BR, and it'll search the corporate directory for Brandon, Brenda, or Brian, or whatever I want to search there. It's going to search against the Webex Calling user database and that contacts field that I mentioned about an hour ago. It'll search all those contacts and all the users, and it'll bring them up, and I can hit the green phone icon for an audio call or the green video icon for a video call. I can also make them a speed dial and via contact card, and I can do a one button click to call them from that speed dial. And it is using the Webex Calling app for the calling soft phone engine for this. So it's not using the Microsoft engine, it's using the Webex Calling app. So you can add a speed dial, hit the call button, reorder them, delete them, do contact searches, basically everything you want to do with the soft phone to do there. That's if you just hit the Webex Calling icon. Now, some people don't want to do that. They'll just say, hey, I'm chatting with someone on MS Teams, and I will hit the call button at the bottom of the chat window. It's basically you're going to pin the Webex call button into that little icon tray, and you hit that, then it puts up the contact card for Charles Holland, and you hit the green button, and then it calls Charles Holland, and you're off and running. And then when you hit the green button, you're going to see the in calling window, and you can basically mute yourself, stop your video, or it gives you a keypad, or you hit the three dots to do hold, transfer, conference, or the bottom one, the one I like is if I need to add a person into this conference and I want to transfer it into a meeting, I can hit invite and meet, and it'll pop up on my side that, hey, I'm starting up a Webex meeting. On Giacomo's side, it's going to prompt him that he's setting up a meeting. And then I have an attendee list, and I can add, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 people, into the meeting from that invite and meet window. What's your thoughts on this? Are we doing the right way? Does it look easy?
It looks like a pretty decent integration.
Yeah, that looks pretty good. Adding the Webex calling features into Teams, is that the feature which is available now, or is that an add-on, or what?
So that two ways to do it. The user, number one, it always follows what the Microsoft admin allows you to do. So if the Microsoft admin allows you to install third-party apps, then the user can install this plugin into their Teams today. If the admin says, no, we don't allow it, then you have to reach out to the admin to either do it for you or to allow you to add it so you can do it. The Microsoft admin can use a manifest file and on their side to add the add-in for all users in the company or a group of users or a single individual user.
So this is a plugin which is already available then?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
And one thing, the plugin, there's two plugins. There's a Jabber version of the plugin for the Jabber soft phone, and then there's a Webex Calling plugin for the Webex Calling version of the plugin. So make sure that you, depending on your call control, pick the right one.
So it's one or the other?
Yes. Actually,
right.
you can install both of them if you want.
Oh, okay.
You just need to have Jabber and Webex Calling installed on your laptop at the same time, which can get really confusing.
Thank you.
Now that's what exists today. The roadmaps, like they'll be in a couple weeks, and within a couple weeks to a month, there is a call history that's coming. I have call history on my account because I'm running a little bit of beta software. This should be in there in about a week, where that we will you'll see that you'll have recent calls list in there, and you also have the voicemail on there right next to recent calls. So to access your Webex Calling voicemail, you hit voicemail there. If you notice, if you pay particular attention, there's a couple things up on the top. One is calls, SMS, so that you can use SMS from Webex Calling to anyone out there will be a SMS. You have a contacts for your contacts list. And then you have call. So if you're also doing a call recording, you'll have all your call recording directly in here. You don't have to go out to another web page and all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool there. The next thing is right now, or for this plugin, you have to, in order for it to work, you need to have both MS Teams and the Webex app installed on the PC or Mac. It works for either one. What you'll probably want to do is, if you're using MS Teams for messaging, you'll want to go into Control Hub and disable messaging for Webex, because you don't really need to have two messaging services, so disable one or the other. A lot of times, I just had a customer, a radiology company, just do this, where they disabled messaging for all their users other than their IT users. Their IT users can handle both WebEx and Microsoft messaging because they're messaging Cisco for all their firewall, wireless collaboration needs. So they're messaging Cisco via WebEx and off and running. But it doesn't get that confusing for them where it might be confusing for some of their users. So by having both applications up, you'll see that application, come up on a window. What we're doing on Windows is we're giving you the ability to hide the application on the system tray. This should show up probably by the end of this month. So it'll basically launch in incognito mode, and it kind of makes it where the only time you see a WebEx window is when they're making a call, and then when the call goes down, it drops it down to the sys tray.
Mm. Yum. Yeah. Oh, it's like freaking cheesecake. Yeah.
Someone's making me hungry on cheesecake. So here's kind of the roadmap that we have. I talked about the call history, the hide to system tray, voicemail. It's there for in preview mode and beta mode. Presence is coming. I haven't seen that yet. And then we're working on voicemail transcription. So you'll see a transcription of the voicemail in the MS Teams interface. Do some more enhancements on cross-launch, call settings, SMS, WebEx Go, and multiple call handling, and some contact management. If you haven't had the ability to check out WebEx Go, do a search on our website and look at WebEx Go. It is a pretty awesome, ability. And it's mainly the ability to say, hey, let me drop my VPN here. WebEx Go is the ability to take a WebEx calling line in Control Hub, basically your business line in Control Hub, and make it so that it will be on your cell phone. Let me create a new desktop here so you can see it better. Oop, I hate that. It goes over to the wrong window. But anyway, I won't mess with that right now. But what it does is it adds a second SIM. It utilizes the eSIM on an iPhone or Android device. And with that eSIM, I can register that SIM to WebEx Calling. So now my office number is also landed on my cell phone. So for companies and users that want to protect the identity of their users, and I want to make a phone call, I can just hit my contacts or my speed dials, and I can say, hey, for this user of, let's say, Josh Longbottom, I'll always use my WebEx Go line to call him. So I'll always use my office number to call him, not my personal cell phone. So then Josh will never know what my personal cell phone is. Same thing when he calls me, when he calls my office number, my phone behind me rings and my cell phone rings at the same time. And it's the cell phone, not the app on my cell phone. I can run the WebEx app on my cell phone and have that ring, but this is actually ringing a cellular eSIM on here. The beauty of it is, hey, I might have cell coverage, but I might not have data, or I want to protect, those users. The only requirement is the phone has to be unlocked and have an available eSIM. It can work with any carrier. You basically set that carrier up in Control Hub to say, hey, this is AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, you name the carrier, and it works. Other competitors' products that have this, they force you down. You have to be in Verizon only, and you can only have one carrier. So our solution on Webex Go basically opens it up to however many carriers you want to link into Control Hub, and then you basically say, Dennis's office phone is now on his mobile phone. And the nice thing about it for me is I can go into my settings, go into my cellular settings, and I can turn on and off my Webex Go. You know, if it's at Friday at 5 p.m., I can just turn off Webex Go and we're off and running. I think there's plans to, at least with Apple, to have that be activated on the phone level on a schedule. You can, within Control Hub, you can control when do I want those calls to ring to my Webex Go line via a schedule. So that helps it there as easily, but it's kind of a pretty cool feature. So any questions, let me know. If you have any questions you want to take offline, it's Dennis Trope on Webex Teams or dtrop@cisco.com. Reach out to me. Would love to have a conversation. And if you want me to come back and present on something else, Vitaly, just reach out to Robert and schedule me up.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis. That was excellent presentation about Webex Calling and Microsoft Interop. And Microsoft Interop is quite complex actually for some customers to understand when we were talking. So I'm glad that you dig deeper and explain.
Yeah, and if you want to see a demo of it, a live demo, just reach out to me or the TSA that covers you, and I'm sure we can get some set up.
Yeah. Yeah, by the way, we scheduled with one of the primary customers, our customers, demo for Webex Go, and they're highly interested in that particular feature. All right, so
Yeah,
at this
I was
point,
going to say, you get kind of finished off with a big piece of a big perk.
Yep. So at this point, I think it's time to conclude our session. Thank you very much for participation. And till the next time.
Thank you, and have a great night, all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dennis.